Elections in Hungary are in 3 months. In April 2026, the electorate of Hungary will decide whether they are persuaded by the narrative of Mr. Orbán, which centers around the question of war and peace, or it will be centered around the narrative of Péter Magyar, who speaks to the heart of the problem, it seems, of Mr. Orbán's system, which is corruption and oligarchic structure. We sat down with two esteemed experts, very experienced professionals from the finance and banking sector, one of them also with a political career in the early 90s in the transition government of József Antal. And we asked them questions about the nature of oligarchic system, seen through their lens, both analytical and practical experiences that they live in current Hungary. And we asked them also the question of how Hungary can cope with it, should there be indeed a transition of power. Both conversations are closely linked together also by the fact that our guests have been participants in Europe Future Forum bilateral Polish-Hungarian format, building perspectives on economic security and on the future of Europe and economic security at seminars organized by Republika Foundation Visegrad Insight in Warsaw. My name is Wojciech Przybylski, and I invite you to listen and watch to this special episode.
My name is András Simor. I'm a retired banker. I started my career still in the so-called socialist times in the Central Bank of Hungary at that time. Then I became one of the first CEOs of a private sector financial institution in Hungary. At the time when the Berlin Wall was still up, that was the beginning of 1989. And I did investment banking, and then I did commercial banking, and then I did development banking, and then I did central banking. So I tried all the parts of banking in Hungary and also in Central Europe, not just Hungary. At one point, I was running a regional investment bank out of Vienna. And I retired in 2019. And I'm still following with keen interest what's happening in Hungary and also in the wider region.
My name is Péter Ákos Bod, professor of economics at Corvinus University. Previously, I was ex-minister economics and also served as a governor of the National Bank, Magyar Nemzeti Bank, for 3 years.
Welcome to the Visegrad Insight podcast.
We bring you global experts on the future of democracy, security, and economy.
The leading voices from Central Europe and on Central Europe.
Hosted by editors of Visegrad Insight.
Powered by Republika Foundation from Warsaw, Poland.
András, thank you so much for joining the Visegrad Insight podcast, a conversation about Hungarian perspective on economic security in Europe. And judging from your extensive experience and your sharp analytical mind, I expect that you basically get us through the fog of disinformation, political communication, and tell us how to understand what often is referred as an oligarchic structure of power in Hungary. And what are the vulnerabilities, or maybe what are the points which Hungary is not so vulnerable because of that? How to think about oligarchy in Hungary? Is it a serious and strategic problem, or it's not as serious as some might probably think or tell about?
Good afternoon. First of all, thank you very much for your interest. I hope to be able to help, but, it's a foggy afternoon, November afternoon in Budapest, so I'm not sure whether the sun is going to shine through in what I'm trying to say. I think what is very important to state at the beginning is that the oligarchy structure that exists in Hungary is very different from what I think normally is perceived about oligarchic structures, because oligarchs normally are referred to people who get rich because they are successful in their business, and then they get so powerful that they can capture the state and twist the arms of the decision makers, which is clearly not optimal in terms of policy making. But in Hungary, the oligarchic structure is very different. Those people who are referred to as oligarchs have never made it through their success in private business. They have not been successful. They have been basically lifted up from nowhere by the state and by the government. They are privy to large public procurement contracts, and that is generally the source of their wealth. Therefore, they are not, if you like, autonomous, independent players who can influence decision making, but it's the opposite. They are acting sort of like the arm of the government or the arm of the state. And they are 100% dependent on government contracts and state contracts.
So we have examples of those people. I think the most notable example is Mr. Lawrence Mészáros, who has been mayor in the hometown of Mr. Orbán, the Prime Minister of Hungary. And his wealth has been at certain points growing as fast as in comparison to the pace of wealth acquiring by Mark Zuckerberg. Mr. Mészáros could have been first. I mean, the speed at which he was gaining capital was all of a sudden, amazing. And I think that illustrates what you just described as a top-down pointing to people who would serve this as a vehicle. But I don't think it was always so. I remember there was a challenger back in the older times when at the beginnings of the current continuous subsequent terms of government of Mr. Orbán, there was an oligarch of sorts, Mr. Simicska, if I can recall, who was a bit of a self-made entrepreneur, businessman, who was competing for power. So there was a transition. Wouldn't you agree?
Well, I would put it differently, but coming back to Lawrence Mészáros, I mean, he was not a rich man in 2010 when the Orbán government got into power. He was a plumber who had a small business in the village where Orbán was born. Now, obviously nothing wrong with plumbers, but, to grow in 15 or 16 years from running a small few people's business into becoming the richest man of the country, it's an extraordinary achievement, and it wouldn't have happened without massive public procurement contracts being awarded to him. You're right, there was another person in the early days of Orbán's government between 2010 and 2016, and also during the previous Orbán government that was between 1998 and 2002, Lajos Simicska, but he was also not a successful businessman on his own right. He actually grew up together with Orbán. I think they were together in the army or at school, I'm not sure. And he was the person who built Fidesz financially. He was the treasurer of the party. And as such, he also got a lot of contracts generally building works. This is what it's easiest to be distributed, road building, sort of large building contracts, so on and so forth. But then they fell out with each other. Apparently, it was at the time when Orbán started to get closer to Russia and to Putin, and Simicska thought that that is not good for the country. He raised his voice. And then he was pushed out. He lost all his power. He lost all his wealth. And that just confirms that these people are not autonomous players. But as long as the government and Orbán favors them, they are successful. But the moment that relationship gets sour, they lose everything.
Now that creates obvious opportunities, of course, and probably I would say political opportunities, and many are looking at such models with maybe envy. I'm not, but I can point to a number of politicians across the world that like these models. This model hasn't been really invented in Hungary. You have mentioned Mr. Putin and Moscow. There are certain similarities. I wouldn't say one-to-one, but there are certain similarities how wealth distribution connected to power has been working in Russia. And in the current context of the world in which we are living in an age of economic warfare, there are sanction policies, there are certain limitations on trade. Economy is a tool of hard power in many ways. That may leave some room of let's say vulnerability. Now I'll test a hypothesis with you, and feel free to tell me I'm completely wrong. We have seen the US sanctions on Russia very recently, and those sanctions were hard hitting Hungarian economy also, because the MOL company is importing quite a lot of oil, and there is a lot of gas import from Russia. So the hard stop of any of these fossil fuels to Hungary would be very damaging for Hungarian economy. And Mr. Orbán went to US, and he, using his network within the Trump circles and MAGA circles, being very close ideologically in the political communication, at least with Mr. Trump, he came back claiming these sanctions are for Hungary lifted forever. US State Department said this is just for 1 year. The hypothesis I wanted to confront you with is whether Mr. Orbán was negotiating more on behalf of Hungary and Hungarian economy, as we know in many ways that Hungary is already preparing for the transition to meet the European strategy on cutting off the Russian supplies. But he needed to deliver ahead of upcoming elections also certain win for the people who are connected and they are living off their business model is basically connected to the current state of affairs. Was it his primary motive? Because there isn't any gain for an ordinary Hungarian citizen from what just happened. Maybe it's just mitigation of certain risks.
Well, it's a bit more complicated than that. First of all, Hungary is dependent on Russian oil, Russian gas, and generally dependent on imported energy. We have one of the most energy-consuming economy in Central Eastern Europe, and we don't produce. We produce some oil and some gas, but not much. And we have a nuclear power station and another one being built by Russian interests. Now, it was always a kind of mystery to most people why Orbán is so much sticking to Russian energy sources, and why hasn't he diversified much more before? even before the second part of the Ukraine-Russia war started in 2022, because depending on just one source for your energy, Russian nuclear, Russian oil, Russian gas, it just doesn't make any sense economically. It is true that Russian gas delivered to the Hungarian border is somewhat cheaper than what you can get in the world market. And Russian oil is also cheaper than Brent because it's somewhat of a lower quality, and that is reflected in the price. But still, relying on one source, it just economically doesn't make sense. And on top of that, we are more reliant on Russian energy sources now than we were in 2022. Our purchases are concentrated more on Russian sources. So that really doesn't make much sense. I think it's got to do with A, political affiliation, B, Orbán has started his opening towards the East 10, 15 years ago. He claimed that will benefit Hungary. And I think it's difficult for him to admit that we have not gained anything out of this. And thirdly, unfortunately, from these purchases, it's easier to cream off some extra profit. And notably, these purchases are not coming directly from Russia to MVM or to MOL, but there's always somebody in between. And who owns these companies, who benefits from being in the middle, that is not clear. And the fear is, or my fear is, that those who are making decisions are also somehow benefiting from these contracts.
Well, that would speak at least partly in favor of the hypothesis that the urge to negotiate lift-off of sanctions instead of simply replacing the sources could be motivated, but only in part at least, by this strong attachment to the power and business elites that are interdependent by now in the system of power. So allow me a last speculative question, and it's an open question. Now we are entering very soon the 16th year, or we are in the 16th year of the government, of subsequent governments of Mr. Orbán, with elections in April 2026. Now, should there be a change of whatever kind in the power structure as of next year, what can you imagine as steps that could help Hungary get out of this, unhealthy for business and unhealthy for politics, the relationship that we have just been describing, that may hamper strategic options for Hungary in the big context of the age of economic warfare, but also they're cultivating a model of democracy, or a model that is not completely a democratic model, namely the oligarchic one. How to get out of it? Should people actually have enough power to make a democratic transition to a new government?
Well, that again is a fairly complicated situation, because for the opposition, or the largest opposition party, just to gain a simple majority, it's not going to be enough to solve a lot of the issues, because a lot of the laws can be changed only with a 2/3 majority. And a lot of the people who have been appointed by the current government, Chief Justice, Chief Prosecutor, Head of the Competition Office, Head of the Central Bank, and a lot of people are going to be there for many years to come, head of the Constitutional Court, and only in case the opposition would be able to gain a 2/3 majority, will they have a chance to replace these people. And while the checks and balances are clearly not working now, frankly, they are not effective at all, not because they wouldn't have the independence to act, but because the people who run these entities are primarily known for their loyalty to Orbán rather than loyalty to their mandate, which is given to them by parliament. Now, once there is a change in government, I suspect that at least some of these people will try to act as independent bodies and again try to block the new government from acting in a number of ways. So that's clearly a huge complication. Now, the second is the oligarchic structures. They own very large companies in Hungary. And for instance, in building industry, they control almost the whole country. And if the new government comes in and starts to issue tenders for contracts, it will be very difficult to find anybody else who can credibly bid for, say, a motorway. And then these people will try, and those people who are in power now and who have the resources will try and exploit their power and charge astronomical prices, which would make it very difficult for the government to show that they can act more responsibly and they can save money in the budget from these projects. So a new government is going to have a huge uphill struggle to establish itself politically and also economically.
Well, mapping challenges, that's a first step, at least to understand, what's up ahead, and maybe in the process search for solutions. Thank you so much for joining the podcast, and I hope we will be hearing again from you, and our listeners and readers of Visegrad Insight will definitely greatly enjoy your insight into Hungary and world affairs, both political and economic affairs. András Simor was with us. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your interest.
Hi, if you're enjoying this episode, why not subscribe to Visegrad Insight? This gives you access to all our latest content online, as well as to our live and online events. You can use our special promo code for Visegrad Insight podcast listeners to get 35% off. Just go to visegradinsight.eu, choose a yearly subscription, and apply code Visegrad35. And now, back to the podcast.
Peter, thanks for joining the podcast of Visegrad Insight. We have had some conversations off the record in Warsaw not so long ago, and now you're back in Budapest teaching at the MBA students, and you have a vast political experience being in the first József Antal government, the transition government in Hungary, and then overseeing the economy sector and the finance sector, also as a governor of central bank. But I think you must reflect back even longer than that on the political culture of Hungary. And in that context, I wanted to pick your brain of how to read the system of Orbán related to oligarchic problems, the problems of oligarchization, and where's the way forward from that. Again, not just because of Mr. Orbán himself, but of a various, maybe some specificities we should know and our listeners should know about Hungary, in why even this kind of oligarchic model has emerged in Hungary. How can we overcome that? So let me just straightforwardly ask you, who is the top oligarch in Hungary today?
Well, first of all, thank you very much for having me now. And also, I enjoyed very much talking to you in Warsaw some weeks ago. And that sharpened my mind on the issue, because now we take it as granted, but you are right. We have to raise the question, who is the chief oligarch and why is oligarchy in Hungary? And I quickly come to the conclusion that it's not part of the Hungarian system. So it's atypical situation, and that's bad news. But the good news is, relatively good news, that if it's atypical, it's not written in the code of the Hungarian politics, that we may get over it sooner or later. Now, who is the top guy? It's very easy to say, because it's Mr. Orbán. The 6-7 families around him are also probably depend on him in many ways, or related to him personally, or family-wise, or close friendship. And we don't have the number two, as we used to have Mr. Simicska some 15 years ago. Mr. Matolcsy, the ex-governor, came close a bit, partly as an advisor and an important person, influencer, and also probably as somebody who got very rich in a probably illegal way. But this is not a repetition of the Simicska time, which was closed. And after Orbán, I think, having learned from the trouble of getting rid of the Mr. Number Two, has no number two. He is the top, and there are other families, a couple of families below him, but they all depend, I guess, I'm not sure, I'm not in the circle, they depend on many ways on him.
That's really interesting that you mentioned Mr. Matolcsy. Once he was a governor of central bank, he was sometimes critical of some of the policies Mr. Orbán was proposing. Not over the top, but there were some friction, political frictions, policy frictions in terms of ideas. Once he was no longer there, it seemed like he lost a certain umbrella of protection, and the prosecutor office started to investigate him and his family quite intensively. So it's quite dangerous job to be an oligarch, even if we qualify this example as.
I guess if you're a member of a gang, it's very dangerous if you are in, but it's more dangerous if you are out. I don't worry about him. I don't think it is Hungary. My guess, my feeling, but the gut feeling is that he's outside of Hungary, and by that time he arrived somewhere which is pretty far physically from Budapest. Then the investigation started in earnest, because what happened was totally clear thanks to the investigative journalism. So we knew what he was doing was against the law, against the principles of a central banking, and was to enrich him and first wife, second wife, third wife, and families. I don't know. I tried not to follow, because as ex-central bank governor, I respect the central bank, which is a national institution, and I'm not happy to talk about it. But since you asked me about who is number two, at some moment I felt that Matolcsy had an influence on Orbán, and when Orbán moved on, and then Matolcsy also started to think about his future, that governorship would end sooner or later, he made, yes, you are right, critical sentences on fiscal and monetary policy. But that's not necessary against Mr. Orbán's ideology or personality or integrity, but the guys who took his position. So it is easy to translate as a lover who's forgotten, or somebody who became number three rather than number two. And it's a secondary whether his criticism was justified. It was, But we all wondered why this criticism, justified criticism, happens to appear when he has only half a year or a year in office, and why not during the 12, 13 years before that. So let's move on, because he is out of the picture. But other families are there, and other families are doing things which I don't easily follow. For instance, the government is just selling a piece of a share of a bank jointly owned by the general public, and the friend of Mr. Orbán, this Mr. Mészáros. Now, Mészáros is number two, although some people say that Mészáros is just a front for himself, the guy for himself. I don't know. I don't live in that circle, but I just noticed that one of the banks that was built on purpose to be a number two to OTP, some sort of building a competition through government money, happens to be owned partly by Mr. Mészáros, and also, as I understand, partly by Matolcsy or the Matolcsy clan, and partly by the state, and the state happened to sell a significant share just 2-3 days ago, as I read in the newspaper. Since it is not stock exchange, this bank, it's a bit more transparent. If it were not in the stock exchange, the whole story would not surface at all, and only some journalists are willing to go after that.
There is a case when you mention now essentially partly selling of the shares by the government, as I understand, to private owners, that is a continued story of the model of privatization that in number of countries, I mean, I don't call it a privatization per se, this is not the case, but when ownership changes hand, when property changes hand from the state-controlled to private person-controlled, and it happens in a rather quick pace over the past 30 years, all across different countries in Central Eastern Europe. In some countries, it resulted in creation of oligarchic models, like Czech Republic, partly attributed to the type of privatization. But I wonder if you could tell the story of Hungary that way. Was that, in any case, at any moment with Mr. Orbán or before, an element of, transfer of political capital, let's call it, to the economic capital of certain individuals, and what happened with it? I'm asking this question with a bigger one in mind. I mean, as you said, this is not typical. Oligarchization is not typical for Hungary. But how then it has emerged and how to fight it?
Yes, it's not typical, and the term privatization is not a good term, because this is a process. First, you privatize. I mean, not you, but some go and privatize something, and then Orbán won, not the present Orbán, but Orbán in the late 90s, so the young Orbán. He didn't like privatization. He already had some grudges against global capitalism and the financial sector, which he regarded as a country boy. For a country boy, somebody from a small town, it was a little bit commerce, finance, insurance, a bit alien. So he didn't follow the privatization drive of Central Eastern Europe as most of us did it. But he tried to support friends and the voting base. But that, I think, is nothing special, not nothing Hungarian. But after 2010, so that's a totally different period, he started something which is a very strange process: nationalize, reprivatise to friends. So nationalize, buy back. It's not the communist way of nationalization by force. ukaz, but buying, sometimes paying too much, even too much for some ex-owners. Could be Americans for the Budapest Bank, it was G Money Bank, or the airport. Some people say it was overpriced, buying, I don't know, political support or corruption included, who knows. And then once in the government hand, reprivatizes to friends. And this bank, what I'm talking about, which is on the stock exchange, so that's why it's a bit more in the light, has become at least partly owned by his friend, childhood friend. But what I also see is that privatization, in a sense, to make the next government's life harder. Because if it's a state-owned company, and when I was in Warsaw, we discussed the Polish state-owned companies, the Hungarian state-owned companies. We have state-owned companies, the electricity board, the post office, rail, and many others, even in manufacturing. That would be inherited by the new government. So that may come in next April. So I see steps as some sort of escape routes that trying to reduce the government's share in strategic businesses, including OTP, including MOL, the energy giant of Hungary, on purpose to exclude the next government to exercise the right of the owner, which I find it disgusting, telling frankly. Also, probably the pricing is an issue, and it's just to build a defense against should the new government enter office, supported by the Hungarian people, who, by the way, would like to take the assets back. And now let's go back to the future, in a sense, that what people think of it. And the people who know at all about it start noticing that as long as I am in office as Orbán, state property is fine, but as long as there's a chance that somebody may come after me, suddenly the ownership titles are dissipated. For instance, the university I happen to be received 15%, if I remember well, the share property of the mall, which is a nice gesture. Yeah, but that also means that the next government will not have that 15% share to vote because it's now somewhere else. And then the university is nominally a foundation, and foundations are protected by European law, and therefore he can claim that, well, I'm just following the European habit because you see the university is the owner of an ex-state asset, and then, well, it's like Harvard, but it happens to be Hungarian government property and equity behind it. So it's a game, I think. But going back to your story, it evolved gradually. So I don't think he in 2010, when he got the 2/3 majority in parliament and the power to rewrite everything, originally wanted to build that sort of Oriental feudalistic. It's a feudalistic order, and it's totally alien because we had strong men in our history, Horthy, Admiral Horthy, but he was not too rich when he got the job, and he was the same, so status, material situation when he lost the job, but he did not get rich during in office, and that's not part. And and that's not well received, even by those who, for other reason, still support Mr. Orbán.
There's so many interesting themes that you just open up, and so little time. On one hand, you said that Mr. Orbán might have wanted to present himself a little bit like Horthy, kind of because of the style. I know also some who evaluate his political culture closer to Kadar style, so the post 1956 politics of Hungary, when essentially Soviets have implicated all the Hungarian establishment in a certain model of controlled communism with some economic benefits. The other question I wanted to ask is that before last elections, 3.5 years ago, there was also this kind of wave of, as you said, additional, let's say, insurance policy building by privatizing or delegating ownership over state assets, including some, as I remember, universities and number of entities that are basically public, and they were given into private hands or foundations, but controlled by, as you call it, by certain families. There are always some people close to that. So my question to you is, where should we look, and where Hungarians are looking for hope to overcome this? Because these moves seem to be dictated by immediate need, immediate calculation, but they have long-term consequences, it seems. How this can be unpacked in the future?
I know that some experts, lawyers, and economists are working on it. And 4 years ago, when Márki-Zay was the candidate to represent the very diverse opposition, as we finally learned unsuccessfully, there was some research to map the ownership, but it's extremely centralized. Although they put a lot of energy and money and legal craft into hiding the final owner. So there are many complex things, and therefore probably you cannot get back most of the money. Bad news. Though it's very personal, because it's not 15 families or 200, but it's one family plus 2, 3 might be also related to him. So if he goes peacefully or forever, and then it's a big if, because if the Fidesz just loses election but is still there controlling all the positions, that's a totally different story. But if the number one disappears from the scene, I guess others will start thinking about the reality. Who owns what? Who did what? So we are in for some very interesting periods should that happen. But I guess part of the money will never come back because it has been semi-legally or perfectly legally taken away. Because the trick is he's a lawyer, but I mean legal background, and the whole cabinet is full of legal experts, and there's a paper about everything. So it's very hard to take it back legally. Illegally through a revolution, that's also not in the cards. It's not Hungarian. I just recall that when I became minister of the first democratically elected cabinet, Prime Minister Antal, there was also assets disappearing, but we wanted to restore the Rechtsstaat, the constitutional state. We wanted sooner or later to join the European Union, so you just couldn't start by saying that now we will correct history. Our voters, by the way, some of the voters expected us to do that, but we could not. So my guess is but ask others, since it's a disputed story, that the next government can go after some things, can stop this outflow of funds with a big thing, can restore competition, law and order, can restore, can take back something, some positions, but cannot bring the clock back to 2010. Now, how the new government can work together with this new economic elite, we don't know. What my feeling is, because I'm not in the know with the very rich people, but I talked to the number 3, a third layer, the tier 2, tier 3 entrepreneurs. They are extremely unhappy with Mr. Orbán. They are unhappy with the Mészáros because the economy doesn't deliver too well. They don't get the money they would love to get. The flow from European funding has been stopped, and they know who is responsible for that. And then they would just try to get rid of the number 1, because they claim they are doing their job. They claim they are entrepreneurs. They don't think they have been created by Orbán. They didn't mind that the regime generated oversized and overpriced projects, but they built the pavement, they erected the house. So they think they can go on without Orbán. So it's not only the opposition would like to see the back of it, but I know some of the people who got rich and they want to be rich.
So it seems if we describe, and that's my final question, if we describe the political proposal or kind of the feeling that Mr. Magyar might be selling his project on is a sort of a conservative reform rather than a revolution. I mean, that is the appeal, it seems, not from the supply side, but from the demand side of the electorate. Is that correct?
The mood is, as I feel, and then there are figures about it, that it should end now, because that's not good. It's too long, not efficient, and we have enough of these guys. Partly because it's not only the top people. You know, if the top guy misbehaves, the country local guys also misbehave, and they can be seen. So it's visible that the money is stolen, and the local bosses misbehaving, and that turned the attention to the corruption story, which was a bit dormant 2-3 years ago. Now, Mr. Magyar's statement was very clear, because he said, well, I will go after you who stole money. I have a list or something, 2,000 to 3,000 people. Now, that doesn't mean that anyone who's been connected to Fidesz should go. Actually, he borrows some of the experts from the ex-Fidesz people. And you know, once in my life, I voted for Fidesz 2010. In that situation, that was totally obvious. So his message is in that sense conservative. His background is also legal. The European Union also would not be too happy to have a noisy transition. You know it much better with the Polish transition. And what I don't know, if it will be enough to change the system in one go, in 4 years, because that's what I don't know. How deep, not the network, but the attitude. An attitude that, that's life. It has to be changed, and I can't see that sort of revolutionary change that enough, basta, we have to, start a new life. They said, enough is enough, they should go. But whether I and others are willing to change and say never ever, I hope, but I am not sure about it.
Well, first of all, we'll be watching closely and observing whether in April next year there is indeed a change, and both the majority of electorate votes for the change, but also to what extent this will be legally producing options for a transition of power and transition and reforming the system. But it's been a fascinating conversation. Thank you for your insights, Péter Ákos Bod, professor of business at the business MBA program. As you said, you should probably advertise what you're teaching and how to join your program on the show.
We discuss things in among students because they are managers, middle managers, and they see what they see and they ask questions. And then, as I said, it's not necessary. What we have is an aberration. It's atypical. You mentioned Kadar. Kadar was not a politician I liked. He put my father behind bar, but Kadar didn't steal the way. Kadar died as a poor man, and his hobby was chess, not building football stadium very expensively.
Please follow Péter Ákos Bod on a numerous other podcasts, most of them oftentimes in Hungarian, of course, but whenever you can, also the Corvinus University in Budapest. And am I right? That's the university. And many thanks for sharing your thoughts here for this show. We'll stay tuned for more episodes of Visegrad Insight on Hungary. We will continue under this series looking at the economic security at the Europe Future Forum and Polish-Hungarian dialogue on this.
Thank you, Wojciech. Thank you.
And that's all from this week's episode of the Visegrad Insight podcast, bringing you the leading voices from Central Europe and on Central Europe.
Make sure to subscribe, and we'll be in touch next week.